Welcome to the Serious Leisure podcast, where we bring you fascinating and inspiring stories about engaging with leisure seriously. We reflect on our struggles and successes with balancing our leisure, work and well-being. My name is Kat Branch and I lead the University of the West of England Centre for Music, and I am your host for today's podcast. I'm joined by our regular podcast contributor, Dr. Sam Elkington from Teesside University, and Sam is our serious leisure expert. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks, Kat. Pleasure to be here as usual.
We're also joined by my colleague, Dr. Petya Petrova, whose soothing voice you will recognise as the usual presenter of the Serious Leisure podcast. Petya is Associate Director of Academic Practice at the University of the West of England. Welcome, Petya.
Thanks, Kat. Glad to be here. And for regular listeners, if you hear my voice is a little weird, I am having a little bit of the sniffles today.
So sad for you. For those of you who are new to the Serious Leisure podcast, a huge welcome and thank you so much for joining us. And you may notice that we abbreviate the University of the West of England to UWE. Now, today, we're really excited to welcome a very special guest, Roger Griffith. Roger has an extraordinary career as a social entrepreneur, a writer, activist, and an academic. Roger has managed to create the unusual situation of combining work and leisure into a single lived experience with the philosophy of try and do stuff that makes you happy, and where these often separated areas of work and leisure blur into a portfolio of meaningful activity with all the hallmarks of serious leisure, but still often categorised as work. This idea of work/leisure combining into one can seem like a pipe dream to many of us. So we'll be exploring how this works in reality and understanding what happens when the boundaries between work and leisure dissolve. So first of all, Roger, could you please introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a bit about your current working life and what it involves?
Sure, I'm delighted to be here. My name is Roger Griffith, MBE, and I am an associate lecturer working on special projects at UWE Bristol. I'm also the CEO of my own consultancy, Creative Connects, where we connect opportunities from underserved or underrepresented groups to large organizations such as councils and businesses. And I also write across a number of platforms as well.
Thanks for that. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface of your working life there. Really interesting. Today, we're focusing on how leisure and work can combine into a single approach to living. So, Roger, I wondered if you could tell us a bit about how you see all the different types of activity in your life, which aspects perhaps feel more closely aligned to leisure, where we might associate that with relaxing and recharging, and which parts of those feel more like work, and which are firmly in the middle.
Great way to start. Let's start with certainly the relaxation side of it, because after I got made redundant in 2009, I definitely wanted to live a different lifestyle, and I wanted to do more things that I enjoy and literally made me happier, and that was using creative arts as a tool to move forward. But as part of that, was also lent into my history, lent into my identity about who I was. So definitely the writing, which I now do across several platforms. Next week, I got an article about monuments, following a year on from Colston's fall, and the inspiration and horror of statues are coming out. I've written a play about Barack Obama's life, and I'm writing a fiction book about a group of 8 guys and male toxicity and friendships as well. I was preparing for my second book, which is My American Odyssey, from the Winchester to the White House, more travels within the US, and connecting that to key incidents in Britain in my life and over the last 50 years. So that gives me a complexity and a tapestry really to work from. There's lots of travel in there, there's some research, there's reading, and a lot of history. So there's plenty there. Both creatively and leisurely to keep me going and relax me. And that's where I get my key sources of energy and my key sources of inspiration from.
It's really interesting, Roger. Even hearing you describe this list, though, it still feels quite worky to me. I wonder what part of that experience that you've described, these different types of writing, what is it about doing that nevertheless recharges you and gives you that sense of enjoyment and meaning?
Well, because I've really kind of branched out my writings as short pieces of my poetry, because they're so compared to 6 years of writing my first book and the research it took to make that, and even struggling with my first novel in terms of getting the pacing and writing. Seeing a finished a project from a written essay or blog, as we now call, gives me a lot of satisfaction. So I like the finished project and looking back and saying, yes, that's come out really well. So when you're writing these pieces, never know how they end up. They might go in different directions. I'll get a brief and kind of draw the dots in between. You draw on history, draw on personal history, and I like to make them as personal as possible. Again, that's one of my things that I've brought into the creative arts of projects, writing about things that are very personal to me. And again, that keeps the recharge, either my family's history or Britain's history, or how that connects with race and social equality, and some of the injustices or inspirations that brings. So I think all of that just keeps the kind of batteries humming along. I also get involved in creative arts. I sit on the Arts Council board and have done for the last 5 or 6 years, and that role of encouraging other artists and other organizations to either improve their diversity inclusion and bring that in. That's also inspiring. And I've this week attended the chair of St. Paul's Carnival, who's Levi Roots, and that him being brought to Bristol. I've worked with the current executive chair at GEMA Radio, and gave her a first opportunity in Bristol, and just seeing that fruition there, and just giving new talent to go on and achieve and surpass expectation and bring that to fruition. It just really gives you a buzz, and exactly when it's connected with history and heritage and culture of our journey as Black people in Britain.
So listening to you talk about that whole selection of different activities or different things that you're involved in there, it's clear to feel your passion for what you're doing and your motivation for being involved in all of that. Now, this is normally the stage where we would have a bit of an origin story about someone's serious leisure activity, which feels quite cut and dry when we're talking about running or fishing or singing, perhaps. But in your case, where all the boundaries are rather blurred, I wondered if perhaps you could take us back to when you were working in what I could call a more traditional way. And then you talked about a sort of redundancy experience that gave you a transition point. Could you take us back to that time in your journey and talk us through to how you brought yourself to where you are now on this quest to do things that make you happy?
Well, I suppose that I need to, as a latter day historian, because I used to actually hate history because there wasn't enough representation. The way it was being taught, it kind of made me excluded. I didn't like the depictions of Africa and mud huts and starvation and slavery before I could really cope with it, which I may touch upon later. But I kind of left school without any qualifications. It wasn't until my mid-20s that I went along the path of lifelong learning. I was always knew I was kind of bright and always loved English, but none of those things were harnessed. And I teach at a university, kind of famously still pinch myself on that journey. But I never saw a Black teacher until my mid to late 20s, for instance. Someone would have told me I could have got paid for talking a lot, as you're going to hear a lot today, and writing. Well, I was signed up to that particular gig a long time before, and it saved me and the rest of the world a lot of trouble, quite frankly. But in all seriousness, I was in the buildings for 10 years. The 80s were dark years in Bristol and Britain. We had in city riots in Bristol. Black male unemployment was 50%, 40% male unemployment, miners' strikes, football violence, and rise of fascism and National Front in the streets, and a lot of kind of street violence. That there were no cameras around, being arrested by the police, stop and search laws, inner city troubles from the and that also broke out in Toxteth, Birmingham as well, both 40-year anniversaries. Things like the New Cross fire happened, where 13 black teenagers who looked like me got killed and nothing was said by the establishment in New Cross in 1981. So that there was a lot of angry kind of times during the 80s, but they're also enriching through music and culture, which taught me a lot about my existence. In terms of the bands around, Specials and UB40 being two, who were singing about my life. UB40, that was the form I was signing off on. That was the first album signing off. Specials had records, Ghost Town, Too Much Too Young was a teenage father, and also Do Nothing and Be Unemployed. So I knew I had to kind of get out of that existence, took a positive action course. 18 years later, I ended up as a senior manager. I did some qualities work. Housing was my profession, but a lot of training in between there, counselling courses, coaching courses, supervision and management, of which I do hold my degree in. I suppose that transitioning taught me that I could, it was possible to reinvent lives, as I'd read from Malcolm X's excellent autobiography, which changed my life. That period, that story of redemption. He was in prison famously when he kind of read and educated himself, and I went on a path of doing similar. It was that story of redemption, of betterness, and making it for yourself that really drove me earlier on. And then dipping into that culture and enrichment of Black excellence, and wanted to do that in the UK, first through housing, but then certainly once I got made redundant, and that period of social justice and a way of combining that into a career, which is where the social entrepreneur side comes in.
Amazing. So when we spoke before we recorded the podcast today, I remember you saying that actually you could see that this redundancy possibility was on the horizon, and that had given you a chance to sort of make a bit of a plan, a sort of an intention about what you were going to do next and what were going to be the first steps you were going to take. I wonder, could you tell us a bit about what those first decisions were, as you knew that then this formal role was finishing, but clearly you made this intentional choice to not go straight into another role like that, building on your housing specialism, but to do something else. So what had you decided, and what approach did you take?
I think there is the role of where friends and beyond family, friends of mentor kind of take over. I've always pride myself in listening and taking advice and counsel from people I know and trust. I have a very strong friendship core who've guided me over the years. And whether it was buying my first and only house, I still live in the only house that I've bought in, and I couldn't afford it, and to make the extra money to make sure that I bought it, and if I carried on renting, well, that would have been unaffordable. And now for me, and with equivalent wages, or in this case, changing career, I'd had good advice. I'd had years of experience from living in a housing estate in Lawrence Weston and in North Bristol, white working class area. So I knew what housing, even though I don't have the formal qualifications, I have the lived experience even then of how a housing estate worked, and claiming benefits and the like. So that was my shortcut and path in terms of dealing in the estates that I worked in Easton and Barton Hill and Hartcliffe and Withing was real tough estates, but that's where I was from, growing up in those tough estates. So I knew who the people were. I knew all the tricks. I knew all the friendly faces, and also they needed opportunity. So that only would take me so far. So the other skills in terms of management, that I remember having a good conversation. So it's got the housing skills. So management you can do you can move around in anything once you can manage. So I did those qualifications, but also wanted to broaden my skills on the softer side of skills. I'm, blessed to be here today, but those soft skills around understanding people, first through 2 years of counselling and training, and then through coaching, gave me the skills about understanding different people. All I was just connecting with was black guys in their mid-50s. Well, that only get me so far. I needed to understand the workforce, understand my workforce and people I manage, and also organizations. So listening to that and being able to flex and change, and then left me with a broad range of skills which I can use now. So set up my consultancy in 2001, the first in coaching. But then once I got, I could see, because we were closing offices, and I was responsible for closing 3 offices in Bristol, in St George, and Barton Hill, and also in Fish Ponds. I knew that my talents could be elsewhere. I was going to get a redundancy. I'd have time for the first time in my life to take a year out. Again, people said, you'll never get that chance again. Don't go straight into something. Do whatever you want to do. Then I took a holiday. I went around the world and to Australia for the first time. Second time, and also in New Zealand for the first time. I went back to America, and also started writing the bones of my book. Then also, and setting up my consultancy properly to reinvent it. It took a year off the grid of the treadmill, and that taught me a lot. It taught me, that I was earning, reasonable money. What I had was job security, but did I need all of those things? What can I survive by? Let's see, in a couple of years, what the worst case scenario would be. I'd been used to working in building sites for years. If I had to go back to doing a shift in McDonald's or doing in pub, then so be it. I can always fall back on my housing experience, in all seriousness, in terms of just temping. I had options for the first time in my life, and I think when you sit down and have a look at the careers that you have, and more importantly, the skills and transferable skills is an important one. I've just touched upon how important coaching and counselling was in that. So when I interview now, when I went into the radio world and took on my voluntary role at Agema, I had those skills there that were, in terms of listening. And the guests would say, "Oh, you were a great listener," because I'd had those skills and of listening. That was also important to my job in terms of whether you're conducting disciplinary or sickness reviews or interviewing people who've just gone through domestic violence or racial harassment. I'd had years of those skills that I didn't know that they could apply to radio and media, as well as making those community connections as well. So I was once 2009 and 10 came around, when I got made redundant, I just was blessed with looking at I've got quite a lot of transferable skills here to do, at least give me an opportunity to try something different and go to that ultimate goal of doing the things to making me happy and living a more fulfilled life.
Okay, so you mentioned there, Roger, that soon after that period, so you took that time out to travel, to reflect, to start your first pieces of writing, and you also talked about doing some voluntary work. Was that an important transitional activity for you?
Absolutely. I'd say the key, I remember, in terms of doing the coaching course, and you had things around values and beliefs. You have to understand that as a coach as well. So what type of manager you're going to be, and so in doing that, one of the things that were underpinned was contribution, and that was something that ran through my family. They chose more faith. I do put mine more in contribution and working in communities. So the minute I finished my training in 91, I remember working with a woman called Leah Goodridge. We know her as a civil rights campaigner now in St. Paul's, who's also from Guyana. And she just made it clear, once I'd done my training, I had to give something back. You had to sit on committees there. You had you spend 3 hours. So I'd always, in 91, I did my training. 93, I was back on the board. And as a trainee, giving back. You mentored on a one-to-one basis. You did what you could in a voluntary capacity. So I'd always kept that for a number of years. And then the organization that ran Ujima, Seed, was going bankrupt, and we had an opportunity. I was asked to be chair, and the business model was just it's going to continue that bankruptcy model. So I used my skills then to just turn it into a social enterprise and make that the key tenure of what we were going to do. That we would have obviously a social context to what we do in community radio, but it was clear that we needed to make jobs. It was also clear that what had pulled me out of social deprivation, what pulled me out of poverty, what pulled me out of violence and some racism, was an economic factor, and that the fact that I've actually got a job, it allowed me to travel, allowed me to think differently without with different kinds of fears, without violence being kind of one of those fears. Just would be economic, and that was something that, again, that's marked my life, creating opportunities, literally robbing the rich, like UWE Bristol, for instance. Making sure we got local contractors, local poets for the event that we just had, and just a small fee, but making sure that those that goes back into the community, the spirit of localism. Now I know that as a social entrepreneurship, but those principles and values are important to carve out before you start, so and it guides you and what you want to do.
That's fascinating, Roger. Thank you. Sam, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, there's so much here, Roger. I'm writing copious notes, so then you've moved on to something else already, and I can't come back to it. It's absolutely, I can't keep up with you. I wanted to just hover around this idea of voluntarism and volunteerism, because the way you're describing it, and again, kind of looking at this from a serious leisure perspective, the way you're describing it, it kind of goes hand in hand with a related idea within the perspective, which is devotee work. And there's parallels there. That devotee, the work that we do, that we might get some reward for, monetary reward or remuneration for, but it's limited. But we do it largely because it's an extension of our passion, and certainly in the case of yourself, firmly attached and an extension of your own identity in terms of social entrepreneurialism, contribute to community. And I just wonder, I guess it's more of an observation, but then I get a question I might ask you then is, does that resonate with you, that notion of devotee work? Something it's devoted. You've made a conscious choice to step away from the work that you felt at that moment in time was not fulfilling you wholly, and you've taken the opportunity and risk. I think there's a certain element of risk, which you've already kind of implied, to go in search of a more fulfilling kind of lifestyle within which you're doing some form of work, but it's perhaps a bit more giving in terms of your own kind of growth and enrichment. And I just wonder if you could spend a bit of time, it's really the decision making I'm interested in there, in terms of what makes you happy. I can, the volunteerism, yes, doing something that you talk about values and benefits and beliefs. So what was the decision making process there that allowed you to make that move?
Yeah, it was as simple as really plotting, what can I do? What am I could have, if it was money my key driver, well, not really. How much money do you actually need? Money will follow whatever career I choose. And if some especially at my time, because a large part of the time I wasn't paid at, and I certainly never took, there was no salary or something. Everything was driven from a project. So it was money was not going to be a kind of key driver, and that could always follow. Writing, one of the most poorest careers I could possibly choose, but that gave me a lot more enrichment. Obviously, in the middle, you kind of need to survive, but that's where, I was lucky that some of the redundancy would occurred, and that's why I make the again the reference only in terms of buying a house earlier. So I had any homeowner, like many people who were students listen to this podcast, know they have a certain amount of financial security that comes with owning property, even if it's never yours, until a later age. There was still that there. There's wealth and capital that you can borrow on and invest in, and you're seen as an all-round a good citizen. I don't make the rules, sadly. So money wasn't the key driver, despite, as you allude to, family members. My father, who's passed away, worked 32 years for London Underground, and that was only he couldn't believe the choice I was going to make. And he accepted it. And then I got my dear nephew I helped kind of raise, who's kind of driven by the more capitalist side of things, and those actually turned me the opposite way. I'm very stubborn in that way. So it was never money. I looked at contribution. That was for fulfilling. Again, that was going to take you so far. So again, I think you needed a kind of mix of. Obviously, you need money to get by in terms of going, visiting America. There's no free passes to that. You need some time then. And I also went from having worked for the city council at a time when wonderful of the it sounds like I'm in the 1880s, not 1980s and 90s, but things like time in lieu and overtime. I got time in lieu as a senior manager, and even paid holidays, none of which I have for the last 10 years as a social entrepreneur. So that awards a little bit of security, particularly with a good employer. As city council, had some ups and downs, but overall fantastic employer. Pension, sick leave, all of those things, which were someone coming out the building sites and as raw as I were kind of heaven, and luxury items as far as I'm concerned. The basic requirements of an employer. I came to learn as, but that's what kind of, I've never forgotten where I've come from. I've never forgotten where my parents came from, and traveling over with next to nothing from Guyana and the Caribbean. Dad, famously took 20 odd days to come here via plane and boats, sending for his family, being in all cramped up in a room. The mum and dad split up. We had some rough times in Bristol and growing up. So those things aren't ever forgotten. And so relatively luxury as being a homeowner with space and security, as it gives you a good foundation to kind of move on. So in terms of that devotion, it's finding out what kind of works. That's why I keep coming back to contribution and fulfillment and the production side of things. When I'm producing things that we put on at the Bristol Old Vic, 50 Voices for Malcolm X, which use local campaigners like Roy Hackett, even a mayoral candidate as he was then, called Marvin Rees. You may have heard of him, mayor of Bristol. And we had people, a disability group called Misfits, and put them on the stage at Bristol Vic for the first time, work out Trinity. They were part of our social justice. So even that, kind of gave a fulfillment, and again ensuring that there was a budget that came along that paid artists. So you'd have that both cachet and reputation, even if people didn't kind of always agree with things that as they were done. I was always going to work in there with those same principles.
Thanks, Roger. I'll chip in here if that's okay. I was joking in previous recordings that I overuse the word fascinating, but I think here the word is inspirational. Really, it's quite something how you've built this new life for yourself. I can't even use the word career because it's career, but it's more than that. We have discussed during this podcast in previous lives how things like health events allow us to reconsider our lives and what's important. In your case, it was redundancy, but it was also your lived experience and what you considered important, and the influence of your family, your upbringing, your mentors, your community, in terms of where you invested your values and yourself. It made me think a lot about conversations, formal, informal, and kind of lead me to believe a lot of us are currently reevaluating our lives because of COVID, and what is important and how we want to spend the rest of our living days in terms of our career and focusing on what is important. It's just really from your experience, if you are going to give advice to somebody like yourself, somebody who is actually thinking, I need more, I can give more. Where would you advise them to start? What would you say to them?
Piece of paper and pen, write or draw. I believe firmly in the connection. I know I've got 3, maybe 4 electronic devices that I can type on. But first of all, I believe in the old-fashioned pen and paper, or quill and or even chisel and stone from our ancestors. So I believe that connection there. And write out about the things that you enjoy and trying to do more of them. That, for me, it's travel and talked about the creative arts a lot. Others, it could be garden. Others have a family, as well as part of that, of doing different things and doing more of them. We're all connected to the same amount of hours in a week. So it's when you have some outcomes and some goals, is in terms of what's written down after you found out, perhaps what you enjoy, what you kind of have to do in terms of either care responsibilities or financial responsibilities. You're still left with certainly in the West, a certain amount of time to kind of connect with the things that you enjoy, and that's certainly a leisure, sporting, creative pursuit. And you may want to turn one of those hobbies into part of the career that you're doing, or that might be that volunteering that I've spoken about. In terms of mentoring, working with a local school, or the Cub Scouts, or a voluntary organisation offering an area of expertise. There's so much, an hour, 2 hours, 10 or a whole week that can be given, I believe, and I think the reward is as rewarding as in terms of giving as the one to receive it. So I think it's really getting in touch with, a lot of people and fight past the era of what's selfish, and I don't want to hear any of that. You have to look after yourself before you can give to others in a good state mentally. And again, that's vital. But again, this is something that builds up self-esteem, that builds up self-confidence, that gives you, especially when you can tap back on the things, even the things that haven't worked, as I mentioned, things that, some dark times with mum, and I'm a father as well. That hasn't always gone well, but they've got a resilience. That you're if not indestructible, but certainly there are things that you've come through, and you can do again. And a lot of that is about accepting failure, accepting compromise, but it's first and foremost driven by having a goal and an outline of what it is that you want to do. And that's what I've certainly connected with over the last 20 years, not going to other people's agendas, going to an agenda of mine. Some of them have been years in the making. As I said, from about 2001, I knew that there was a chance of redundancy. I was 7 out of 8 years in review, and so it's just a matter of time and just waiting for that. So that was a long-term plan, and then there are short-term plans when there might be just I could say a small project. Over the last year, as I said, I committed to wanted to branch out in writing, and I've had great support from Arts Council England in doing that as an artist and not as a board member, and have been delighted to take across those fields of writing, including having a chapter published along with Nisha Bevin on the environment and Black and people of colour being left out of the equation of environmental racial justice, that we need to kind of have that reckoning as well. Following helped co-found the Black and Green Project along with Paul San, and that's now left firm in the hands of the Virginia Radio and Bristol Green Capital Project, who are taking that forward.
Thanks, Roger. It's so interesting to listen to you and to listen to how you have prioritized your values and made space for your values in your practice. But it also occurs to me as I'm listening to you that one of your core values is personal development and lifelong learning. And actually your constant pursuit of different activities and different ways of enhancing your skills, developing yourself, experimenting and trying something out had then allowed you to do that transition and to be in your current life doing the kinds of things that may make you happy. And as somebody who once upon a time used to teach personal and professional development for students, you're really the example that I would have wanted to put in terms of that commitment to own growth, but also own growth in fun ways, not only in instrumental ways, but own growth in following your heart. And following your values. There's no question in this, but feel free to comment if you wish. It just really struck me.
No, thank you for kind of reappraising that in terms of personal development and lifelong learning. I've made a note of that as well. So it's learned from the conversation, even hearing myself, and even talking about some of the things that I've forgotten I've done. So I'm getting to a bit of a veteran stage, but that is those two commitments of lifelong learning and personal development, and also there's the hard business side of it to improve skills, as I've done with management, but also some of the softer skills in terms of the writing courses that I've done just last year. I mean, the playwriting was instrumental in improving my skills. I was really struggling with the art of playwriting, and the course just gave me that structure, and it was amazing how it's kind of fit into place. A year ago I couldn't write dialogue, and now even in my fiction writing, people are praising me about the fictional dialogue. So it's a skill that I've developed over the last 18 months. So it's not true what they say, old dogs can learn new tricks.
Thanks, Roger. I know Sam is very keen to ask you a few questions, so I'll pass you directly on to him.
It's very difficult to ask you a question, Roger. It's simply because there's so much I want to get into one single question. So again, it's kind of an observational kind of piece from me, but then leading to maybe, I don't know, an open invitation to elaborate on from your part. So there's some pretty intentional language that you're using all the way through here, which I think is really, really important. You're using the word connection quite a bit, and I think that's really interesting. And you talked about being life-wide in your outlook. You didn't use that word, but life-wide is how so you're looking for connections across multiple planes of activity. Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting thing to consider, because a lot of people we've had on the podcast have one thing. Yeah, they have one interest. You have multiple interests, and what you've done is you've looked for and built connection between all of them and brought them into a relationship with each other in a way that allows you to do all of them, but still derive that value and still be able to then contribute something through being involved in those. And again, coming at this from the serious leisure perspective, you know, so a concept we might apply to this, for instance, is the idea of an optimal leisure lifestyle. And this is something that we all maybe strive for. We never, you know, I don't suppose consciously or intentionally go out our way to do these things. However, I would argue that you have, you know, and you've done that in terms of whether it be the more casual kind of leisure, kind of relaxation. You found time for that, and you've managed to position those in a way that you're still able to do those things. But certainly you can hear in the way that you talk about your writing and your creative pursuits, you know, the connections you've built up with that, between those activities and pursuits, with your, you know, social entrepreneurial work, your volunteer commitments, you know, that. So for me, that's an intentional thing that you've done, seeking those connections, building those connections, and taking that life-wide view, but not necessarily. You talked about goals and being short-term and long-term, but I think it's very much, for me, it boils down to being authentically you, as opposed, that's the goal. The goal isn't, you know, to have a long-term change the world. It's to continue being authentically yourself and being able to maintain that attitude of contribution. Would you say that's a fair kind of appraisal of, you know, your leisure attitude, I guess?
Yeah, remind me to contact you when I need a biographer. I think that's I think that's a great summary of that, and I love the word intentional. It's, you know, I hear about luck, and then sometimes I slip into all of that. There is obviously elements of that, but there has been that intent. Connections, definitely. I've named a company after that. Platforms, bridges. That's how I kind of see it. When I was at before I got asked to join the Arts Council board, it would always strike me as you know, and from my time in Lawrence Weston, living in a white working class environment, but being with a black family in from London and visiting there regularly, I've always been in two worlds. You know, Michael Quanger's song "Black Man in a White Man's World" is one of my, you know, songs, if you like. So to make that real example that always struck me was just bizarre in Bristol. I do work with Watershed. I have some fantastic times. I've been very supportive of my career through Come the Revolution kind of film collective that I participate with. We'd have great conversations and I'd meet a lot of different kind of white administrators and white artists and activists, and they'd have a project or a scheme or initiative, or go in and or they put on a film, like kind of where are the black community and or the underrepresented groups. Where can we get more diversity in? I'd walk 2 miles, probably less than that, a mile and a half, into the heart of St. Paul's for a meeting or an evening occasion. And, you know, inevitably the conversation would be, yeah, well, there's no opportunities. They don't want us there. And I'm like, I've just left them having an exactly parallel conversation. How can I bring this together? What can the work do to do that? And that's where kind of Ajima came in to kind of fill that a gap, and you know, you can work with what I controversially term as kind of enemies and frenemies, in terms of, you know, these aren't, you know, some of the, you know, whether it's, there is all kinds of skepticism, whether it's UWE Bristol, whether it's Merchants of Adventurers, whether it's Bristol Post, and then making the apology. You know, everybody's got their own agendas. Everybody's got a past and a history that you're not going to agree with. Organizationally, though, what can be done, and then, you know, sometimes you're dealing with individuals within an organization, and that's the key difference to make. So making that connection has been vital. I haven't, you say about authenticity, and that's because I haven't changed my opinion. I still fight racism, I still fight social justice, but I understand that there are ways of having triple win scenarios: win for the organization that's funding the project, win for the people delivering it, and the win for myself and all the team that I'm working with. And if you're working on those ways where you're getting more people happy, never had no such thing as 100%, is always going to be something, then you're going to be on the right track. So that's the intent that kind of drives that on a wider basis. But personally, yes, it's always been delivered from my beliefs and value system.
Roger, while I'm listening to you describe your approach and all the things that you pack in, I'm not going to lie, at some level, I feel kind of slightly exhausted. Maybe I'm just weak-minded. I'm wondering how, with this approach that you've made, where work, leisure, life, meaning, it's all kind of smooshing and swirling together there, how do you stop yourself from burning out? Because actually, it seems to me that you couldn't necessarily, how does one escape into leisure if in fact work and leisure are all in the same areas mixing in? How do you stop yourself from overworking and make sure that you're still recharging?
I think that's the area that goes to the kind of the right side. The left side is creative, and then you try and get something in the middle. If you're but the projects I take all projects of social value, but can still lead to burnout. I mean, I'm very much engaged in what UWE Bristol are trying to do, and in terms of decolonising the curriculum, in terms of more representation, and even just working with the students in terms of mentoring. I've just been kind of delighted to be on the as a relatively newcomer, just be on the Students Hall of Fame recently, that just dropped in this week. So I think those kind of affirmations and those they help. There's no room for tiredness when somebody needs help and support, and that's whether that's an individual or organization. But having choosing the creative arts as opposed to sport being my other a passion in life. Both I used to play, but I no longer. But I suppose when you're reading great work or you're watching, I get through quite a few box sets. That kind of recharges you. Kind of thinking. I'm always driven that for all of my talents, immortality isn't one of them. So I get some sleep like we all will at some time. And there's no time or resting for that. I've come to this relatively late. I told you about 10 years of unemployment and struggle and violence. I told you the middle part of my career was within as being a bureaucrat, a very proud bureaucrat within local government of 18 years. And so this part of it really allows me to work from home. The pandemic has been fortunate for that in terms of I've got home, I've got internet, I've got security, I've got space, I've got quietness from the area that I live in. So when you get those affirmations from life and society, people affirmations that I've just mentioned in terms of awards and accolades, or just simple things of life, you just think, well, we're going to create more of that, and you're on the right track. It's almost like life does pat you back on the back. Sure, there are setbacks along the way, but relatively, and especially from where I've come from and where my parents have come from, they're relatively few and all part of life. So I think that kind of recharges the batteries. Not seeing friends has been not great, but we've worked around that. Gone for one-to-one walks. line manager at UWE, Lynn Barlow, has been just greatly and supportive, known her for a while, and just in terms of doing what I've done, working with Alicia and Mian on the Windrush project, again, taking the Black Elders up to at Bower Ashton and campus for the first time. It's the first time they were out. When you see those things and see the students interact with them, as I said, it just recharges the battery. Sure, you feel fatigued. My partner has to kind of bear with all of that, but ultimately that's what I believe I'm here to do. I talked about contribution in terms of those values, and that's ultimately a part of it. But you reinvest that through writing. That's what recharges me. I know in terms of if I haven't written, the last couple of weeks have been really intense. I'm not as happy as I was, and so I need to start writing again. And ultimately, I get a little bit buzzed in there. I was like, if I start slipping back into that, try 15 minutes each time, or doing some research or reading around it, I'm better. I'm more happier. So that's a kind of escapism. Especially when it gets to the kind of fixed inside, where you can just take yourself away from financial COVID pressures or family stuff and just escape into your own world. So it keeps going back to that having those kind of creative anchors. I strongly believe in them alongside and having that kind of work-life balance. So it doesn't feel so much, my writing doesn't feel like work. It feels like a pursuit, because I've encompassed it in my life. I'm now a paid writer. I've had 3 writing commissions this year, and that's so. But it doesn't feel like work. When I'm delivering the training and working for UWE, yes, that does. But again, there's an element there in terms of delivering race equality training, either via Creative Connects or Diversity Trust, that I'm really pleased and proud of.
I'm really struck, Roger, by actually overall what comes through is that actually you're not really trying to escape your life, because you've managed to make it a place that you want to occupy right to the corners, which is an extraordinary achievement. I think that is what all of us are hoping for and bumbling around trying to work out what to do. So thank you so much for sharing in such a clear and specific way how you've approached that. And I was also very reassured to find that your advice contained something as simple as starting with pen and paper and what inspires us. I wonder, Roger, if I could dial back a little bit in our conversation to when you were talking about some of the risks associated with this approach that you've taken. You were listing the benefits of that bureaucratic section of your life you were talking about, where you've got sick pay and holiday pay and security. And then you're in this phase now where those are not key features of this kind of portfolio life that you're living. And I think that is something that stops a lot of us, would probably stop many of our listeners being a bit bolder with our approach to the way we've constructed our lives. I wonder what is your experience overall in terms of is it worth it, risks and benefits? And how did you talk to yourself about these risk factors when you were starting to make these changes about how you were going to put your life together?
Again, that's where I've said I'm in a real good close connection with my friends who've been friends now for decades, and Paul Salons and Byron Lee and Fred Semples, and new friends as Emmanuel Duque and Mandy Bancroft at UWE. It's just like those kind of sounding boards. What might what's the risk and reward? I didn't have young children. Decided that I was one and out as far as children was concerned. So I didn't have that as a financial freedom from that. Others would pursue that. I earned a reasonable salary that I could save towards different things. So those were the kind of downsides in terms of the risks, and again, because I had kind of skills, I knew I could go back into something else if it didn't work out. And not everybody's got those options, but I think most people got more options than they perhaps presume. That's where the pen and paper comes down, and the analysis, and the in terms of drawing a path. If that's your way minded of finding out what is it ultimately you want to do, because those things will, they pay for themselves if you like. I don't suffer at present, and I know what that like. So I've got family, mental health issues, so I don't suffer from that, because I think that's linked to my creative stuff, and there's no. That's where I get my solace from. I've looked at where I am the happiest. So those either time lost in work or time with the counsellor at present, I don't see the requirement for. So there are benefits that you can that you gain by having a clearer idea, listening to your own values as opposed to either your parents or society's or friends. I know what peer pressure was. It was not cool to be educated. I famously, when I was 16, I did two. I always knew I could do English, and I did 2 evening classes, and I had to invent a second girlfriend rather than said that I was going to evening classes. That's the estate that I lived in. That's not their fault. That's down to me. That was what my mentality was at the time. And then they were saying, okay, you're going to see your your second girlfriend. I wasn't. I was studying in choir with books and doing my English O levels. So those were quite, kind of looking back, they're just strange things. And then when you're looking at things and you see on television, you're reading it either through fiction or documentaries, you think, I've lived quite an extraordinary life, or my family has, or a family member has. Even as I say, my parents in terms of getting here is a story. There's always, not everything ends up in gold medals or millions of pounds. There are lots of ordinary people, especially because that's what I focus on in my broadcasting, particularly when I'm in America. Lots of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and it's only moments in history or moments in time that you're looking for when you're telling a story. I joked earlier about biography, but I remember a foot soldier in America met Dr. King. Marched there, was there for the Selma riots, which when I was there. And he famously told me when I told him he also was there for Barack Obama's inauguration, which is another inspiration to me. That when he was growing up, they couldn't vote for a dog catcher because you're in your local area, let alone have a black president. So these extraordinary things are kind of draw and give you that inspiration.
Sam, did you want to jump in there?
Again, kind of just how I kind of attack these things in terms of there's an observation, then there's probably an open invitation for elaboration from you here. So, what I mean, Patty's question was, what you would your advice, I guess, in terms of making those decisions and to navigate the navigation of that. But for me, there's a clear sense that you've worked hard on your self-awareness, and we talked about the making intentional decisions, but that self-awareness, and to do that, it's a slower process, isn't it? So we're all very, very busy, and I put myself in this category, and I'm just as guilty as everybody else. You go, I'm far too busy to even process this and make decisions, to even bring my values and beliefs into this decision making, because I'm just too busy. So is it right? Is it wrong? Is there a right or wrong? Is it going to make me happy? Those kinds of, but that self-awareness, I think, you've had for quite some time, but it's something that you've honed and nurtured. And for me, that's allowing you to make intentional decisions about what it is you do, how you do it, and then creating a craft inside the kind of repertoires within your kind of leisure lifestyle to allow you to do those things in a way that allows you to continue to drive those benefits. So I think that for me, that's my observation. My question, I think, which is what everybody wants to hear the answer to this. Okay, I'm putting it out there right now, is you're fairly new to academia, untainted, some would say. Give it time is what I would say to that. But also, I wonder, given what we've just spent an hour talking about and this wonderful tapestry that you've crafted, what are your honest appraisals of the academic culture in higher education? Because surely you've got a sense of how things work. You've probably had, marginal experiences of people asking you to come in and do talks and stuff in the past. And I wonder how, whether that's been your hook you're in, if you like. But what, you obviously interact with academics on a daily basis now. You're part of the culture. How does that sit with you, given what we've just discussed? I don't think we've got time for a full answer, but it's the question I've been wanting to ask for about 25 minutes.
I don't know how to give half answers, so you're gonna have to bear with me my process, and doing so, I'll talk through it. It sits with me. First of all, was uncomfortably, because as I said, I've never been to university. I don't know what the kind of system is. So yeah, so thinking that say nobody I know, friends, family, none of whom went to university. It was more, seeing that report from the local government talking about failure of white working class boys. But I grew up alongside them, and that's been going on for decades. Quite why they felt the need to bring in white privilege and other areas in these culture wars. It's another story for another day. But so some of that is uncomfortable in terms of that's who you're kind of perceived as. But then there's lots that I offer, and I know what in terms of going back to what you in terms of your values, beliefs, in terms of lifelong learning. As well, but I know what I've got to offer. I know what that intention is, and that history that I bring that other people don't bring and can't bring. That's what I'm here to give and be a part of. So that's when it does feel very much being comfortable in terms of even before I started working at the university. Someone had read, an academic had read my books, and they said next time think about doing it alongside a PhD, because you've got a lot of research in there. You've set it out. It's a bit rough and raw and ready, sure, because my first attempt at anything like that. The way I'd gone about it, it's been 4 months in Bristol Central Library looking at the issue of the transatlantic slave trade and Bristol's role within that was something, again, that I just felt I needed to understand it. I need to have a different relationship with the transatlantic slave trade. It was one of real anger, understandably, and I don't, that hasn't moved anywhere, but I had to kind of learn from that. Wasn't going to get anywhere in what I wanted to say. Otherwise, it would just been a book of anger, and there's nothing wrong with that approach. That's not what I wanted to do. As the words of former Premier of Trinidad, who wrote about the business of slavery, Eric Williams, another someone of African descent, but president of Trinidad and Tobago, and wrote of have to be kind of dispassionate and kind of look at us as our ancestors as commodities, and in order to understand and then pick and then explain and then work with for the future. And that kind of changed my view of it. Again, that's a very academic way of looking at those things. So these latent skills, or kind of things that we're doing already in terms of preparing the first book or preparing an essay, I was doing, and so I embrace them, and I know that's all part of my kind of career trajectory. I love teaching at the university, and the interaction with the students that that I have, and what they gain from it, and what they can see. They can see, hopefully something of themselves in that study and struggle. From whatever background, in terms of using a family connection, or it might be due to ethnicity, or again being the first in their family to study. So those things are things that I'm very now proud of, and I embrace. In terms of how the apparatus, as you say, I've seen enough not to be too drawn into it, but that's only because there's only certain hours in the day. I'm working on the 25th hour and 8th day. I'm not allowed to say anything about that. No, it's a hush operation. We're not that far away. You'll be able to see it in Matrix 5 or something like that. But in all seriousness, there are just so many things that I want to pursue. I'm quite happy at the level that I'm working to. I get a lot of freedom, as mentioned, in terms of the teaching, guest lecturing, and coming across and giving advice to academics, and that interaction with students, and working with projects that connect the community to the university, and vice versa. To me, there's so many academics within our community, so much about their subject that we can learn from. And when I approached the university, they said, yes, of course, no, we don't know about that. Things have changed immensely, and will continue to work rapidly. And I'm happy to be at the heart of those conversations.
Such an interesting commentary, Roger. Thank you for sharing those insights. As we start to bring things to a close, Petya, did you have some last comments for Roger?
I've been listening to everything Roger was saying, and I would attempt to make a comment on what I've heard, and then Roger, please feel free to tell me that's a lot of rubbish. And so I'm kind of very conscious about making comments on some other people's lives. But what I feel like we've heard today is a lot around your lived experiences as a Black man living in Bristol, and you've gone on a journey to reflect and interpret these and capture these through your art and through your work, but also you've gone on a very we talked about you going a very conscious journey of your own development and growth. But I think a lot of your work is, through your work, you have been helping all of us develop and grow in terms of our understanding of your lived experiences and the lived experiences of your parents and your community, and then going as far as the kind of the US context and all of that. And I think through all of this, we have discovered the secret of the matrix in terms of the 25th hour or the 8th day in the week, is because, like Sam was saying, you have been authentically yourself, and you've been doing something that's meaningful. And the word leisure doesn't begin to capture it, because it's leisure, its work is being yourself, being your authentic self, but also changing the world in your own way, in the way that you have the capacity to do so, and you've developed and grown that capacity. It's really interesting to just get that full picture of thinking, being, and way of being in the world, and way of changing the world. So that's what I kind of heard through our discussion today. And I'm not sure if you have anything to comment on that, or indeed question any of that.
No, I think that's a kind of fair summary. If I can draw on both of those last kind of two questions and combine them to kind of gather in a summary, in terms of just having a awareness of where you're kind of plotting to go towards. I mean, it does mean it is very deliberate, and it does mean you have to slow down a lot, because you're working towards something. It's not, you shouldn't be on a treadmill. I joke with my partner about the tortoise and hare approach, where I will take my, he's like, come on, we got to go. I'm like, why? Let's get there. Get there when we kind of get there, and then whilst he's sleeping for a nap, I've made it there conscientiously. It might go around this way and that way. So there is that deliberation that I think we all can bring to our private lives, and that rigor that we have in our professional lives. I think we can bring that into our domestic life. Often I hear, no, I don't want to plan anything, and that's all well and good. My sister's like that. However, what do you actually want to achieve when you end things? And then there's a little bit of Sam's question, but to your point, yeah, growing up Black in Bristol, and particularly British, when we were growing up, being told to go back home. Home was Bristol, and born in London, so it's kind of having those experiences, having them that still sting. They do kind of guide you, and they haven't been. That resilience is drawn over decades, which is partly where the other kind of question kind of popped in. So you're able to make those decisions. When I got asked to accept the MBE, it's a decision for everybody of color with the word empire. If you've got that background, I come from a place where Demerara sugar was made. In terms of my parents' connection, so the slave fields are there, the sugarcane towers above where my parents went to school, but they see themselves as British. Most of it was called British Ghana. I can't change those things. I was able to make a decision based on family, based on the friends who've supported me through years, and that sat comfortable with me in terms of it being something of acceptance. So I think if you once you've got that framework and foundation, you're able to make more clear-headed decisions, going back to the having those kind of values and beliefs in place. And sorry, the other point about the academia that I just noted was that I'm often asked about why are you America? And again, that before I started at university, that's something that researchers do. They go to a different field, anthropologists, and they have a look at things. I now know that there are words for these things: anthropology, ethnography, and more. I didn't know that at the time, so I was already on that field of work. Examples from the civil rights, from racism, which are extreme and horrific, as there still are, in terms of George Floyd, Miss named Breonna Taylor, also give lots of inspiration from kind of Dr. King to Rosa Parks, which inspired the Bristol bus boycott, which inspired our equality laws that we have today, and making those connections, bringing it back home to what Sam said, is something that clearly is a value that I espouse and wanted to deliver and be a living embodiment for.
Roger, thank you so much for everything you've contributed to this podcast episode. I feel like we could go on, and I have to say, by a kind of feeling of osmosis, you're passing through a sense of just passion and intentionality about the way that you're living your life and the way that you've put it together. And it's an enormous challenge to me, and as I'm sure it will be to our listeners, because there's a simplicity about the way that you are living and your approach, and that you have chosen to look in the mirror, to find your authentic self, to be accountable to that authentic self, and to bring those values and intentions into the distant corners of your life. It's been absolutely fascinating hearing how you have done that, and also what the potential costs and challenges have been, but ultimately the exceptional rewards and benefits. So thank you so much for telling us your story and for articulating with such insight the different parts of your experience and responding to our questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. It's been a real pleasure, and hope you have enjoyed it. It's great to reflect on some of these things that helped me tremendously. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Roger. And of course, thank you to our regular contributors. Thank you to Dr. Sam Elkington. and to my colleague Petya Petrova for relinquishing the presenter's chair for this episode. And thank you, of course, to our wider podcast team, Julia Denman and Helga Gunnarsdottir, who is working in the background on recording and sound. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to joining you on our next episode, where we continue to talk about leisure, work and well-being, and what we can all do to engage with leisure seriously. Goodbye.